They knocked her into the wall and laughed as she steadied herself on the concrete. No apology. No hesitation. Just boots scraping gravel as their voices faded down the hallway. To them, she was nobody, maybe a contractor, maybe lost. What they didn't know was that she wasn't just Navy. She was the Admiral of the SEALs. Before we show you how Admiral Avery Cross turned an entire training compound into a lesson in humility, make sure you're subscribed with the bell on, and drop a comment telling us where in the world you're watching from. Because this wasn't a story about disrespect. This was the moment an entire base realized they had shoved the wrong person. The rain had stopped minutes earlier. The sky was still bruised with storm clouds, and the Atlantic wind carried salt and diesel across Forward Training Compound 7. Admiral Avery Cross stepped onto the gravel lot wearing nothing that revealed who she was. No stars, no ribbons, no polished brass. Just a simple Navy windbreaker, worn black slacks, and a slim briefcase that gave away nothing. She moved like someone who didn't need to prove anything. Shoulders relaxed, eyes scanning the perimeter, noticing which antenna was down, which Humvee had a cracked tail light, which guards' boots weren't laced correctly. The two young Marines at the checkpoint barely looked at her. "Ma'am, this is a restricted installation," the younger one said. "Contractors check in through logistics." "I'm expected," Avery replied calmly. The older Marine squinted. "No one's listed under your name, ma'am. You have orders." She handed him a sealed envelope stamped with clearance digits he clearly didn't understand. He hesitated, then started fumbling with his radio. Avery stood still, letting the wind tug at her jacket while she waited. Inside the base, voices carried from the barracks. Laughter, bragging, the usual ego of young service members. She didn't smile. By the time she reached the operations building, no one had stopped her. A bored logistics clerk looked up. "Ma'am, contractors check in downstairs." "I'm not a contractor," Avery said simply. He opened his mouth to argue, then saw the clearance code on the folder she placed on his desk. His jaw froze. She walked past him without another word. At the end of the hallway, officers argued behind a closed door. A major, 2 captains, 3 lieutenants. They were debating weather maps and tomorrow's joint SEAL Marine maneuver. None of them noticed the tactical flaw Avery had already spotted on the hallway map outside, a route error serious enough to jeopardize an entire convoy. She listened quietly. Then it happened. A group of Marine NCOs thundered down the stairwell behind her. Loud, careless. One of them shoulder-checked her hard enough that she hit the wall to steady herself. "Watch it," he muttered. Another snickered. "Careful, Grandma. Walls don't move." Avery didn't react. She simply watched them disappear. Moments later, a lieutenant stepped out of the briefing room, giving her the same dismissive glance you give a misplaced clipboard. "We're in a classified brief. If you're waiting for Commander Ethan Marshall, you'll need to wait out here." She nodded and stepped aside. The briefing inside continued. Loud arguments, busted audio, sloppy communication. They tossed around the word NATO like it meant nothing. None of them realized the mistake on their own map. The same NCOs returned, laughing again. The one who'd hit her grinned. "You still here? Didn't think contractors were allowed near OP briefs." "I'm not a contractor," Avery said, her voice steady. "Sure you're not?" He smirked, brushing her shoulder on purpose as he passed. More laughter. She didn't move except for the slight adjustment of her foot, the kind only a trained operator would notice. Avery stepped outside. The sun had broken through, the air thick with dust, oil, and burnt rubber. Beneath it all she smelled chalk and sweat, training mats. Past the vehicle bay, a cluster of Marines circled a sparring pit. No medical staff, no supervisors, just boots, ego, and boredom. She was about to leave quietly, until she heard that same voice again. "Well, look who's still here," the NCO called out, leaning on the gate. "You sightseeing, ma'am?" "Lost," another chimed in. "Maybe she wants to join. She's been hanging around all day." "Come on," someone laughed. "Let her in. See if she can throw hands with someone who isn't wearing a tie." The gate swung open like a joke invitation. "No contact unless you want it," one of them said. Base hospitality. Avery paused, scanning the group. Not with fear, not with hesitation, but with calculation. 6 Marines. 3 SEAL candidates watching from the fence. And none of them had the slightest idea who they had just challenged. The loudest NCO was favoring his right leg, old injury, probably the knee. The one beside him had taped knuckles but leaned too far forward. A brawler, no formal training. The third watched Avery differently, not mocking, but analyzing. That one had seen real combat. She noted the exits, the wall behind her, the sun angle, and how many would jump in if this went further than a shove. Then she stepped inside the circle. Gasps and whistles rippled through the crowd. A few recruits lifted their phones halfway, unsure whether to record or pretend they weren't. All right, the loudest NCO said, raising his hands like a show host. We've got a volunteer, or spectator. He gestured at her windbreaker. You can take the jacket off if it restricts movement. Avery didn't move. He chuckled. Okay, let's make it fair. Just a little push test. He stepped forward lightly, pretending it was harmless, then shoved her hard with both hands. She staggered back 2 steps and hit the concrete wall with a dull thud. The circle erupted in laughter. Didn't mean to knock her that hard. She's still standing though. Ma'am, you good? One teased. Avery adjusted her posture, brushed off her sleeve, and said nothing. Dust settled around her boots as she raised her head slowly. Her eyes locked onto the man who'd pushed her, and something shifted. Not anger, not embarrassment, assessment, precision, like a sniper calculating wind. The NCO's grin wavered, but still no one knew who she was. All right, he laughed nervously. Guess the wall wins round 1. One Marine tossed him gloves. He didn't put them on. He rolled his shoulders and stepped closer, hands up, elbows loose. More boxer than soldier. Look, ma'am, you don't have to stay in here, he said, circling her. But if you do, move your feet. Avery didn't move. Phones lifted higher. A joke was coming. Maybe another shove before they all went to lunch. The NCO jabbed forward. Slow, telegraphed. Harmless. He wanted a flinch. She gave him none. He tried again. Feint left. Lunge right. Enough speed to make her stumble. She didn't. Her right hand caught his wrist mid-strike. Twist. Step. Drop. In one blur of motion, she swept him off balance and slammed him flat on his back with her knee on his chest. Dead silence. She stepped off him without a word. No showboating. No tension. Just calm withdrawal. Like she was resetting a knife into its sheath. A SEAL candidate in the back leaned forward, whispering to a friend. His eyes stayed on Avery, recognizing the technique. He'd seen that move somewhere, under a different instructor on a different field. The remaining NCOs exchanged uneasy glances. Okay, one muttered, forcing a smile. Lucky grab. A larger, thicker Marine stepped forward, red forearms, jaw built for bar fights. My turn, he said. Avery didn't resist. He rushed in faster, arms high, heavy, trying to muscle her. She sidestepped, redirected his weight, clipped the back of his knee, and dropped him to one leg. Before he could rise, she pivoted behind and locked his arm sharply. He tapped instinctively. She let go. No laughter now. Younger SEAL candidates straightened. Phones lowered. Avery finally spoke. Quiet, controlled. You really don't know who you're pushing. No one answered. The first NCO scrambled up, rubbing his elbow. You former spec ops or something? He stammered. Avery looked at him, 1 second unblinking, and that alone made him look away. They assumed veteran, maybe ex-SEAL, maybe a retired instructor wandering the base. But the truth stood 10 feet away, pulse steady, already evaluating how many of these men she'd soon be training. Because this wasn't retaliation. This was a warning. Then, bang. A door slammed open loud as a rifle crack. Stand down. The voice wasn't shouted, but it carried enough force to drop every spine in the yard a notch. Commander Ethan Marshall strode across the gravel. Boots sharp, jaw clenched. His eyes scanned the crowd, then locked onto the 2 panting NCOs. What the hell is going on here? Sir, we were just running an impromptu sparring drill. One tried. She volunteered. The other added quickly. Didn't say who she was, sir. We thought she was logistics. Marshall's eyes narrowed. Who? Avery turned toward him. She hadn't moved from the mat. Windbreaker still zipped. Calm, unreadable. She spoke one word. Cross. Marshall blinked. Cross, he repeated. And you're first. Avery. There was a pause. Then recognition hit him like a switch flipping. His posture changed. His face tightened. Something snapped into place. Wait here, he said. He spun around and jogged back toward the operations building, muttering to his aide. The door slammed behind him. For several seconds, no one spoke. Avery looked around the enclosure again. The NCOs now stood farther back. One fiddled with his gloves. Another stared at the dirt. Then the aide returned, not walking, running. In one hand, a red sealed folder. In the other, a satellite radio still hissing with clearance codes. He handed the folder to Commander Marshall at the doorway, and that's when everything changed. ADM Avery Cross, KNA Vispec Workham, Commander of Naval Special Warfare Command. His back stiffened. His chest rose, breath caught in his throat. Marshall stepped back outside with the folder still in his hand. He stopped at the edge of the mat, eyes locked on Avery like he was seeing her for the first time. Admiral on deck. The entire yard fell silent. Boots snapped together. Phones lowered. Shoulders squared. Most of them didn't even know what Comnav Spec Workham meant. But the word Admiral hit like a hammer. Even the cocky NCO who had shoved her earlier shifted instinctively into parade rest. Face pale. Avery stood still. She hadn't asked for recognition. She hadn't demanded the title. But now that it was out, it filled the air like gravity. For 10 long seconds, no one spoke. Finally, she did. Now that you're listening, Admiral Avery Cross said. Voice calm but carrying absolute authority. Let me be very clear. She stepped off the mat. Not angry, not triumphant, simply in control. Every movement was deliberate. She didn't need to raise her voice. She had rank. I didn't come here for ceremony, she continued. And I didn't come here to be saluted. The words settled over the stunned yard. Commander Ethan Marshall stood to her right now. Posture stiff. Folder still clutched like he wished it explained the last 30 minutes. I came unannounced, Avery said. Because I've reviewed 27 operational readiness reports in the past 6 months. And your base showed 3 serious inconsistencies. Protocol execution, perimeter integrity, and NCO evaluation. Her eyes shifted toward the same men who'd shoved her earlier. So I decided to see it for myself. There was no venom in her tone. She didn't need any. The yard was doing the math on its own. You didn't recognize me. That's understandable. I'm not in uniform. She tugged lightly at her windbreaker. Plain, worn, unmarked. No medals. No stripes. Just another pair of boots on the gravel. She turned toward the line of SEAL candidates and junior Marines still locked in formation. Moments ago, their faces had been casual, cocky, amused. Now they were pale, rigid, frozen. But here's what's not understandable, she continued, voice sharpening just enough. The moment you thought someone didn't matter, you stopped acting like soldiers. No one moved. Even the wind seemed to wait. Some of you saw an older woman and assumed she didn't belong. Some of you saw civilian clothes and forgot your core principle, respect without condition. Her eyes locked briefly with the first NCO. And a few of you thought it might be funny to push someone who wouldn't push back. She stepped into the center of the mat again. Let me disabuse you of that fantasy. Her gaze swept across every face. My name is Admiral Avery Cross. I command Naval Special Warfare SEAL teams, DevGRU, SWCC, NSG, and all classified special reconnaissance assets under the United States Navy. Silence. Heavy and absolute. And if I hadn't been who I am, if I'd been a liaison, a visiting trainer, or even just someone's mother walking the yard, what would you have done differently? No one answered. She gave them that moment, the weight of it. Then she nodded to Marshall, who looked like he'd aged a decade. Commander, she said evenly, gather your recruits. Yes, ma'am. Her voice cut through the quiet again. We're not done. The wind brushed against the chain-link fencing. No one dared shift. Commander Ethan Marshall raised his voice sharply. Formation. Dress and cover. Move. Recruits scrambled into alignment. Boots scraped dust into thin clouds. Rows tightened. Eyes locked forward. Even the cocky NCOs stood rigid now, jaws tight. Avery stepped in front of them. No podium, no stage, just a slight rise in the gravel. She didn't raise her voice. I've been in the Navy for 33 years, she began. 22 of them with teams that don't officially exist. The recruits listened like the air itself depended on her words. I've commanded men and women whose records you'll never see, in countries that don't admit we were there. She took a slow step forward. I have bled in the Pacific, crawled through caves in the Hindu Kush, sat in briefing rooms in Langley while drones circled targets I knew wouldn't live to sunrise. Another step, and I've buried more sailors and Marines than I can count. Her voice softened, not weaker, but heavier. Many of them brave, talented, promising, undone not by bullets, not by IEDs, but by ego. She looked across the front row. The same NCO who shoved her stared ahead, sweat staining his collar. You think your enemy is out there? Avery motioned toward the horizon. Sometimes your enemy is the little voice that says, this one doesn't matter. She paused, not theatrically, but because silence made the truth sharper. That voice makes you careless. It makes you arrogant. It makes you shove someone into a wall because you think they won't push back. She let the sentence breathe. I've seen what that mindset costs. I've had to explain it to mothers who will never see their sons again. I've had to sign letters that end careers before they begin. She took another step forward. But unlike a battlefield, this was a test. And you failed. No yelling. No barking orders. Just clinical truth. She turned toward Commander Ethan Marshall. Effective immediately. Those responsible for the incident in the yard are to be reassigned. Marshall nodded, already pulling a notepad from his pocket. Avery faced the formation again. You'll report to remedial field instruction. Week 0 format. Under my direction. You'll train until you learn to spot weakness in yourself before you point it out in someone else. And when I say jump, you won't ask who's watching. You'll ask how far the blast radius is. A quiet murmur moved through the ranks, quickly swallowed. Avery stepped back and folded her hands behind her. If you're here to wear the uniform and post about it, leave now. But if you're here to build something that survives in the dark, congratulations. You've just enrolled in the only course that matters. Commander Marshall called the unit to attention. Every boot slammed down in unison. But Avery wasn't looking at them anymore. She was staring through them, at the institution they all claimed to serve. The office felt too warm, not from temperature but from discomfort, the kind that sits between pride and embarrassment. Commander Ethan Marshall stood behind his desk, arms stiff. The aide from earlier lingered awkwardly in the corner, pretending to organize papers that were already perfectly aligned. Admiral Avery Cross stood in front of the tactical chart on the wall, the same faded laminate, the same blue route running through a mountain range that didn't exist. She traced the line with one fingertip. Who drew this? Marshall cleared his throat. Captain Royce, logistics coordinator between our SEAL detachment and Marine training unit. Was it reviewed before being posted? Marshall hesitated. I believe so, ma'am. Avery nodded once. Then she pulled a grease pencil from her windbreaker and circled 3 spots on the map. Here, you've marked an elevation gain of 1,200 feet over 2 clicks. Fine until it rains. Then this entire approach turns into a slide chute. She tapped another point. And your alternate route cuts straight through a controlled burn zone. Marshall stepped forward, frowning. Are you sure that data was updated last quarter? It was, Avery said. Satellite updated, not field verified. She circled another area. And this rally point? You've placed it inside a natural funnel, defensible on paper, but if your comms go down, and in that terrain you've boxed in your entire element with one exit and no high ground. She tapped a third spot. This supply cache is near a water source. Smart, except that it floods seasonally. I know because I ran an op in this valley in 2019. Lost 2 crates of medical supplies to runoff. She turned toward him. Your people trust the terrain because it's printed on a wall, not because they've walked it. The aide stopped pretending to shuffle papers. Marshall's face paled. Ma'am, I take full responsibility. Good, she said, because you're going to fix it. He blinked. Of course. How soon? Before first light. Deploy your top 3 logistics officers to validate both egress routes. 1 SEAL, 1 Marine, 1 Intel liaison. No vehicles. I want boots on the ground and live comm checks. Yes, ma'am. Avery walked slowly to the window. Outside, recruits were running cleanup drills, refilling canteens. The mat enclosure was cleared. The wall she'd been shoved against was now just another slab of concrete. I didn't come here to embarrass your people, she said quietly. Marshall stepped beside her. I know. I came because there's a drift happening between the field and the flag, between rank and reality. She turned to him. I wanted to see where the gap begins. Marshall lowered his eyes. You've got good men out there, Avery said. But they're undisciplined, comfortable. They don't fear being wrong. And that's how they'll lose the next fight, before it even starts. She lifted the tactical chart off its hook, rolled it, and handed it to the aide. Burn it. The aide clutched it like contraband. Marshall exhaled. Ma'am, I should have recognized you. Avery shook her head as she moved toward the door. You should have recognized what command looks like, whether it's wearing stars or not. And with that, she left. No ceremony, no salute, just silence. The kind that comes when institutional respect finally realigns. By the time Admiral Avery Cross stepped back into the yard, the mood had changed completely. No laughter, no casual pacing. Every recruit stood straighter, not because they were told to, but because something in the gravel felt heavier now. The same NCO who had shoved her stood at attention in the far corner. Uniform neat, jaw tight, eyes locked forward. As she passed, he didn't speak. But his salute, silent, crisp, faster than regulation, said everything. Avery returned it with the slightest nod and continued through the yard, the same way she had arrived. Quiet, steady, wearing no decorations. But this time, no one mistook her for anything less than what she was, the Admiral of the SEALs. What would you have done if you were one of those recruits? Should someone have to prove their rank to earn respect? Or should rank speak for itself? If this story hit you, tap that like button, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you never miss when the uniform speaks louder than the noise. And if you know someone who thinks titles don't mean anything, send them this video. Your next mission is already on the screen. Go watch it now. I'll see you tomorrow, same time, new story.